Good evening. From the day we're born, there is a battle we must fight. A struggle between what is kind and peaceful in our natures and what is cruel and violent. But now for some of us, that choice has been taken away. A secret society exists and is living among all of us. I know what you're thinking because I've been where you are, but I have proof, and tonight I'm going to show you something. Make you believe.
That the only thing we have to fear is itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 38 of The Fear of God. That is a magic number. It will be my age this year, which is crazy to think about. This is Nathan. I am one of your vaudevillian hosts that is usually on this show, doing our little circus routine. Usually with me is Reed Lackey. Reed and I have been peers and friends, dear friends, for going on 2 decades now, which is crazy to consider. Usually he's with me. Usually it's not that big a deal. We Skype, so I can typically see him. But just a few minutes ago, I turned on Skype expecting for his lovely smiling face to be there. And his wife was telling me that he'd been feeling kind of down, just some work pressures and things like that. Some other stuff had been just kind of affected him. And so he was going to some kind of camp, some kind of adult sort of camp thing. Like for a week or so. I don't know. I hadn't heard of it before. It sounded kind of intriguing, frankly. Who doesn't need a little bit of away time every now and then? But who knows? Those places can be full of weird people, in those sorts of scenarios. Reed! There you are! You came back from camp! And,
I think you've set a new record for how long you explained my being absent in this situation.
That was a lot of setup.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to know what goes on at an adult camp, but,
Well, I didn't mean like not a kid. You saw the movie. You know exactly what goes on at an adult camp.
Anybody up for a campfire? Huh?
But, I just meant as opposed to like a kid's camp, which would be weird for you to be.
Yeah, that would be strange.
It's weird either way. Anyway, how are you, my friend?
How are you? Doing really, really well. I'm excited that we're covering this film today, and excited about I enjoyed our conversation last week, even though we didn't really seem to enjoy the movie. But yeah, we have a conversation here every week about the intersection of faith and the horror genre, and we are following up on last week's conversation about 1941's The Wolfman with another more recent film that also deals with werewolves and deals with a similar theme. This week we are covering Joe Dante's The Howling.
I was thinking about this, Reed. You made the comment last week and just now about quote unquote a more modern movie, and yet The Wolfman was in 1941. 40 years later was The Howling, which, if you're keeping track at home, was almost 40 years ago. So
yep.
It's technically it's more recent. Yes. It is more recent than The Wolfman. Is it a modern movie? That remains
That's
to be seen.
That's a good point. Yeah, it is really funny because we did we companioned Bride of Frankenstein with May. That was a film from the 2000s. But I was like, we did Let Me In, which was 2010, but then we did Reanimator, which is, 85. It's interesting because, man, there are so many films that deal in some degree with wolves and werewolves, but early 80s was like
Harry and the Hendersons?
That's not a wolf, that's Bigfoot.
Oh yeah, he's a Yeti.
No, that's the abominable snowman. No, it's Bigfoot. Get your monster straight. No,
that was messy. No, she's a dragon thing.
And you just...
We don't know what she is. She's a dinosaur thing. Nobody's seen her.
You just keep
really.
going. No, for in all seriousness, like for reasons somewhat unknown to me, like I don't know why this trend happened, but the early 80s was just the time to make werewolf movies. Like most of the sort of the great werewolf films that we have, not all of them, but most of the great werewolf films we have come from the first half of the 1980s. So I don't know what was going on.
Teen Wolf.
Thrillers from the 80s.
Like
yeah.
84, 85, 86, somewhere in there.
How recently have you seen Teen Wolf? I just want to know.
I don't know.
You've never seen Teen Wolf? Because you sure reference it a lot for somebody who's never seen the thing.
Well, right. But, I mean, you know, I've got a nice cultural appetite, so I'm aware of a lot that, you know, exists in our sort of pop culture zeitgeist. Really, I'm just trying to hide my affection for the short-lived MTV series Teen Wolf. Which, no, I'm kidding. I actually have not seen any of that.
I've never seen an
hopefully
episode.
Never will.
Yeah, I've never seen an episode. Yeah, it's funny. There's a plethora of examples and opportunities to discuss werewolf stuff, but some of the strongest stuff for me still stems from this early to mid 1980s period. There were two, and probably my two favorite werewolf films of all. This one and American Werewolf in London both came out in 1981.
Do you like? I think I've seen it, but I don't remember much about it. Do you like Wolf? Is that the Nicholson?
Yes, and that's an interesting one. It's not got the lighthearted flavor that some of these have in terms of just, you know, like it's not a straightforward horror film. It's more of a drama with some horror elements to it. Directed ironically by Mike Nichols, who is primarily a comedy director. But yeah, I mean, I do enjoy it. I think the last time I saw Wolf with Michelle Pfeiffer and Jack Nicholson was maybe 15 years ago. Maybe. So memory's a little fuzzy on it, but I remember liking it. Fuzzy. Exactly.
Wolf.
Oh, the wolf puns. But yeah, I mean, like, honestly, I went back and forth for a long time about whether or not I wanted us to talk about American Werewolf in London or whether I wanted us to talk about The Howling. And honestly, I'll have to put it out there that I think American Werewolf in London is the better film. I think it is probably I mentioned last week that it's my favorite werewolf movie. The reason that we're talking about The Howling is because of something that we'll get into specifically in themes.
Knowing you and knowing how intentional you are with like every decision, I just have this image of like, see what listeners don't know is like hanging behind you is a Simpsons poster, and I just have this image of you as a Simpsons character in a room with American Werewolf in London and The Howling on opposite sides of the room, and you just walk back and forth, and it's like literally just for like 3 days, just pondering like which one do you do?
No, it's what's ironic about that is that I took a vacation, about a week's vacation last year, and much of that time was sucked up with walking back and forth in the room between American Werewolf in London and The Howling. So I don't know if you were spying on me or if that was just a guess.
Which one?
Guess. But no, decided to go with The Howling, even though yes, I would acknowledge that I think American Werewolf in London is a better film. But specifically, there's a couple of thematic elements to this that I believe that when we get into it, I believe that The Howling was the first film to do this to werewolf stories. It was certainly not the last, but I'll save that for when we get there. A few trivial bits on this. The makeup effects are a name that you might recognize just from an earlier episode of The Fear of God. The makeup effects for this were originally helmed by Rick Baker, and Rick Baker eventually left this project to go and work on American Werewolf in London. And evidently, he made the right decision because he won in 1982. He won the very first Academy Award for makeup effects for American Werewolf in London. So evidently, he made the right decision.
Wow.
But he left the effects work in the hands of a man named Rob Bottin, or Rob Bottin, I believe it's Bottin, who did the makeup effects for The Thing. And and so I think, but that's one thing that I think the makeup effects on both of those films, but I think the makeup effects in The Howling are really incredible. I mean, there's a transformation in American Werewolf in London that is just unparalleled, which is why it won the Oscar. But I think the makeup effects in this are really very, very good. I'm not going to, but I could go through every single scene in this film. In literally every scene, there is a wink or a nod or a reference or a citation of werewolf cinema throughout film. I mean, it's in literally every scene. There's some image, or there's some character name mentioned, or there's some reference in some capacity. The man waiting outside the booth when she's first trying to meet Eddie in the beginning of the film. The man waiting outside the booth to get in there is the legendary B movie director Roger Corman, a name you've probably heard of. Yep. Interesting enough, the actor John Carradine, who is the old man at the colony, he's the one who tries at first to sort of throw himself into the fire and say he can't take it anymore. That actor John Carradine was the actor that Universal Studios was originally pursuing to play Dracula before the role went to Bela Lugosi. He had been a long-standing character actor. Dr. Wagner, the character, I don't know if it's Wagner or Wagner, but Dr. Wagner, the person who we see in the telecast at the very beginning of the film.
Right.
Well, if you remember from last week, the director of The Wolfman was George Wagner. I mean, it's everywhere through this film. You could dissect it.
Well, and I mean, the most obvious one, which I appreciate you permitting me to state, was when the news couple is watching The Wolfman.
Right, exactly. And I don't know if I don't know if you watched. Did you watch through all the end of the credits?
No,
there's a little button at the end of the credits. But yeah, the over the credits, you're just seeing grilling hamburger meat. But then at the very end of that, when the credits are all concluded, it cuts back to the Wolfman, when the gypsy tells him, "Go and God be with you." Kind of a cool little button. Very, very dependent and beholden to Wolfman and, Wolfman lore, et cetera, et cetera. We've already talked at length about Gremlins, directed by Joe Dante, which is, if you haven't heard that episode, go back and listen to that episode. We have a lot of fun.
That's a great episode.
But it was interesting because it was actually this film, The Howling, that Spielberg saw and liked, and it's why Joe Dante got the opportunity to direct Gremlins. Yeah, it was because of The Howling and how strong The Howling was. For a long time, Gremlins was going to be directed by Tim Burton, of all people. But Tim Burton at the time had not directed a full film, and Spielberg was very impressed with The Howling, and so enlisted Dante to direct Gremlins. But I do think that The Howling is a very strong film. What was your general impression of it, or what were your thoughts about it?
I liked it. I think, for what viewers may have, or listeners may have heard last week, and what admittedly was likely a little bit of boredom with The Wolfman, I found The Howling, which I knew nothing about. So I didn't know. I mean, all I knew was werewolf stuff.
Right.
So I didn't know anything about the plot. It's a pleasurable experience when you can plug into a movie, and even with some of its dated production elements, still be like, that was just fun.
Yeah.
That was a fun little romp. Definitely had some scary elements to it.
Sure.
Is pretty great on atmosphere and mood. So yeah, I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I really, like I said, if American Werewolf in London gets the number 1 slot, The Howling might get the number 2 slot. Silver Bullet is going to make a top 5 for me, even though I think there's some, that's personal affection, not necessarily objective quality. But The Howling, even objectively, I think is a really strong, still holds up kind of entry. Interestingly enough, as affectionate as I am for this movie, I've not seen any of the sequels. I've not watched. I think there's like 4 sequels, and I haven't seen any of them. Maybe I'll need to correct that. I mean,
you know what? There's a lot of in them. Howling.
Somehow I expected more from that joke.
Yeah.
I
right as I said it, the pause that you heard was just really like disappointment in myself.
Now I feel ashamed.
Because now I'm pot committed. I've got to say it.
Oh, man. Yeah. No, I mean,
then you just hope. Because
maybe he'll laugh. Maybe he'll laugh. I'll say, I'll just say it. We'll just see. Oh, gosh. But yeah, I mean, like, it's funny because this is one of those just the epitome of like an 80s horror film. It's very much like just in the style of the 80s. It's got a look to it that's very 80s. The one thing that I think is really outstanding and exceptional about it is the makeup. The transformations of the werewolf are just horrendous. I still don't know how they accomplish some of the things that we see on screen. And it's all practical effects. There's no computer generated effects at this time. So it's all done practically, and it's mesmerizing. I have no idea how they do some of what they do. But yeah, I mean, I think the whole tone of the film is solid. I think the The pacing of it is strong. I think it's the fears and the scares are very calculated and effective. And I really, it's a hard film for me to even find.
When was the first time you saw this? Do you remember?
I was a kid. I want to say I don't have a strong memory of the very first time that I saw it, but
that's jacked up.
I was probably 8 or 9, like when I saw it. You know me with these horror films, you know.
Right.
But yeah, I was probably 8 or 9 the first time I saw it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't have much that I dislike about the film. I mean, there's some scenes that I'm uncomfortable about. Like, I don't know that it's specifically a dislike because it feeds very directly into the theme of the film. But the opening sequence, like where she's wandering into the porn shop or the snuff films and stuff like that, like that's very uncomfortable. The actress herself, Dee Wallace, was really made uncomfortable by the filming of that scene. So a lot of what you see translated on the screen is actually her real life discomfort with having to sort of be there and do that. So that's uncomfortable. There's a couple of things towards the middle part of the film that I'm like, why do we need to have this? Like, why is this here? But I mean, overall, I think that this is one of those films where the things that I like about it so far outweigh the things that I dislike about it that it's almost hard for me to harp too much on what I dislike about it. It's just a solid, enjoyable 80s horror flick. So yeah.
Well, and once it, I mean, are we in likes? And
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, once it gets going, it's pretty compelling. And, you know, you referenced the transformation scene specifically, but even generally speaking, I was really impressed with the creature effects. Yeah. I mean, like, you know, even from a preconceived notion of what you expect a werewolf to look like in a movie, there was still some variation. And I'm thinking specifically of the office sequence where
oh my gosh, I
don't even remember the character's name, but the woman who has shown up to assist gets mauled. But you know, when he reveals himself in full wolfness,
right?
It was pretty creepy.
That's Terry. Terry is her character's name.
Okay.
That moment is in one of my scares because it creeps me out to no end that she's just sitting there looking through the files. And then all of a sudden his hand like reaches down for like
he like gives her he smacks her upside her head.
Oh my gosh. And just the immense size of the creatures when they transform, like they're so freaking tall and just they're menacing and horrific. Yeah, I mean, if you want to like moving straight into scares, I mentioned the transformation already. We've already talked about the doctor's office scene, but the whole sequence towards the end at the barn is just really unnerving. Like it's just, I mean, like that whole, when the whole colony is there and you kind of see the end result, the end game for what this colony is and why these people are there. That's really creepy to me. Even still, it's still really effective. And they're attempting to get away and all of the werewolves are kind of swarming and swirling around the vehicle and just, it's a pretty, when it decides to, pun intended, but when it decides to go for the throat, like it's really pretty effective. Goes for the jugular. If you
I mean, when things get hairy.
When things get hairy. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, even early in the movie when Terry, you said her name is Terry?
Terry is the character.
When they're investigating the crime scene or Eddie's apartment and the dog jumps up to the window. I mean, even just little jump scares like that.
Right.
I mean, you know, is it scary? Is it just disgusting? I mean, right immediately before Eddie's transformation, when he's like digging in his forehead.
Oh, and ad-libbed the line. The actor ad-libbed the line, "I want to give you a piece of my mind." Really? He digs out this part of his brain. I know it's pretty rough, and there's some gross outs.
Well, and we can't forget like one of the scariest moments in the movie is, you know, at the end when the reveal happens on the news program
on live TV,
and you know, you get the Hello Kitty. You know, it's like
I was going to say the Chia Pet.
Yeah, I mean, suddenly we go from that. That's how Joe Dante got Gremlins. That's the proto Mogwai right there. That's Gizmo. That's early developmental, you know, stages of what would become Gizmo.
Oh my gosh.
She looks ridiculous.
Yeah, it's so funny because given how strong and how effective the rest of the creatures look, like she really does look much tamer. She looks like a sort of like a cat. I kept thinking of that moment from Emperor's New Groove where like Isma transforms and she's like, supposed to be this big ferocious thing, and she's like, "Now you will feel that. Is that my voice? Is that my voice?" I kept expecting this creature to spit out that sort of high pitched.
I take it back. Don't kill me.
Gosh.
Well, and it's made that much more dissonant by the fact that even feminine werewolves in the movie up to that point are still horrifying, hulking, and terrifying.
They're ferocious looking. Yeah,
it's not. It'd be one thing if like all of them had that sort of weird, kind of cutesy, like strange anime kind of whatever to them.
Right.
But they don't. And so when she kind of twiddles her whiskers and it's like, it's like, what are we supposed to be looking at here? Like, you expect a kid to be like, I'll take that one,
I have to imagine that he must have just been trying to make her like look less ferocious than they do.
Sure. Sure.
I have to imagine that that's the intention behind it. But boy, the effect is just like,
and to somehow generate some empathy that he's killing her. I get it. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Like, the effect is a little sillier than I think maybe was necessarily intended by that moment.
They just scoot a little bowl of milk out in front of her. It's like a kitty cat.
Well, yeah, and
it turns into the meowling.
Oh my gosh,
like that?
That's I mean, I don't even know how to proceed from there because now I'm just stuck
you got to cut some of these bad jokes.
Well, I mean, but one thing that I think that the film does have that is even still consistent. I don't know why I'm surprised when I watch this, but I think I'm just not expecting films from the 80s to be that substantial for the most part. I'm thinking that films from the 80s, even when I go back and revisit them, even when I'm thinking about them as possible episodes for this show, I'm thinking like, yeah, we'll probably have to stretch a little bit or we'll just use this as a launch pad for something. But this film is clearly very aware of kind of what we talked about a little bit last week with The Wolfman, of this sort of dual nature conflict and the internal nature conflict. But one of the reasons specifically, if you're fine diving right into themes, one of the reasons specifically that I wanted to talk about this one versus American Werewolf in London is because in American Werewolf in London, everybody still kind of feels the same about being a werewolf. Like it's bad, it's horrific, you are haunted by it, you don't want it to be true. But with The Howling, you have this whole colony of people that not only don't mind that they're werewolves, but they are actively embracing the fact that they're werewolves. They have completely, and that was by my understanding, I mean, other deeper horror fans may correct me on this, but
are there? Whoa. Are there, Reed? I mean,
deeper horror fans than me? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, do we need a new host?
The gauntlet has now been thrown. But
right, by yourself.
But I mean, I think that was the first time in werewolf cinema where the idea of them not really minding that they were werewolves was introduced. I think this film sort of brought that up first. Werewolves had always been treated as this sort of haunted, horrific thing. But the fact that they really kind of like that they're werewolves is a whole nother subject. It's a whole nother take on it, because as we had a big, lengthy conversation last week about this whole struggling with your inner nature and struggling with the things that you're impulsed and drawn towards doing and how you're more than those things, they embrace it as if, no, this is the substance of who we are. Like, no, this is what we are. We are just animal, and we are going to feed these instincts as we see fit and indulge them as we see fit. And that's a whole nother conversation that I'm sure we'll get into.
But not tonight.
Well,
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. You just set it up like maybe one day on another podcast about another Wolfman movie.
As I look off in the distance and the music swells.
You're like, I hope Nathan takes the bait on this one and picks up the conversation.
So I'm going to just hold up a tennis ball and lob it to you whenever it's your turn.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Well, I have a couple of themes that are worth kind of considering, that I don't know, just stuff that kind of jumped out at me. One of them is just, I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but I think this movie makes a strong case that the mustache should have just stayed in the 1980s. Right? I mean, like, there's just a really there's a really compelling case to be made that that's where it needs. And in fact, one of the scares I wrote down, but I didn't say, was mustachioed, fanged Bill drooling during lovemaking in the woods.
Yeah.
That was disgusting.
Yeah, that makes feels slimier.
Which leads me to another theme. And that's that lovemaking in the outdoors is always better in theory than in actuality. I think that's what this movie is trying to say.
That's what you got from that scene, huh? That's what you got,
right?
This wasn't as good of an idea as I thought it was. I always thought this would be sexier, but no, it's not. It's not quite.
No, they're just weird and creepy. And I love how it ends with the animated wolves mating.
Oh, right. Then, as the camera's panned up, suddenly they're real life
totally
figures.
hand-drawn little wolves.
Turn into hand drawings.
Like the cartoon wolves.
Oh my gosh.
And then just the last theme would be just don't go to adult away camp. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
As I've learned, evidently.
Right.
I didn't realize I'd gone, but
it's only going to end in blood and tears,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I want you to, I feel like my rich themes have stirred something inside of you, and I want you to run with it.
No, what's interesting about that, this whole idea of a commune, they call it the colony, but this whole idea of a group of people that have gathered together, I mean, that's an interesting notion to me in and of itself. I mean, I've never really been one who was terribly attracted to the idea of hey, we're just a group of people sort of separating ourselves out and, living in our own little bubble, doing our own little thing. I mean, obviously.
So you would have not been an elder in the village.
No, I probably would not have been an elder in the village. No, but that's something that just that idea has always been sort of foreign to me. I don't know if it's that I'm always that I like sort of engaging with broader things or with the world around me. And I say this having, never traveled out of the United States, but I don't know, the idea of just secluding yourself off in this group of people that you're with just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't sound appealing to me. It always sort of reeks of there's a cultish thing happening, which in this case,
right.
Yes, in spades, but.
Well, and this is why it's annoying to me that you saw this movie when you were 9, other than just the inappropriate nature of it. But, also just, I knew nothing about the movie. I didn't watch a trailer. I did not know anything about the story or the plot or what I was going to see. So to you, it might be silly that I would not think naturally this is going to end with a colony that they're all werewolves. But I didn't, when you're first meeting all these people, clearly they're odd.
Right.
But I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. I don't really know what's happening. Somehow at some point, lycanthropy is going to be a part of this story. I know that much,
right.
But I didn't know how it was going to go.
Right.
And so, and there's a part where I thought, okay, is just the nymphomaniac werewolf.
Oh,
chick
yeah.
Is she the werewolf. You know what I mean?
Right.
I didn't, so I think that's what I mean by it was kind of fun watching the movie. I just didn't know where it was going to go.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't know it was going to end in pyrotechnics. It actually reminded me a lot of, have you seen the X-Files episode Bad Blood? You know what I'm talking about at all? It's with Luke Wilson. Guest stars in it before he was a name. Yeah, but in this case they're vampires, but it's almost the exact same concept.
Really?
Just like a comedic take on it. It's this colony of vampires who live in a trailer park.
Oh my gosh.
And Scully and Mulder stumble upon them, and it's a whole episode. You gotta watch it. It's really fun.
Here's the thing, is I need to watch a lot more X-Files, because I need to have these cultural reference points with you. I know X-Files was a very big deal to you, but yeah, I've only seen probably.
I can make you a list. I don't have many lists in life that I can pass along to you. I might do this.
You're going to make me a list of these are your X-Files essentials?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. You should do that.
I mean, I can even just, I'll make 20 and then just whittle it down to a dozen.
Okay.
I'll even be that cutthroat with it just so that I'm not saddling you with gobs and gobs of television to consume.
Right.
Here's a 20, but here are the 12 to watch.
Oh, so yeah, and then I'll report back to you. I'll let you know.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll do that next week, next podcast.
I'm gonna have a lot of TV to watch now.
We are so far away
from the Howling. No, it's not even funny.
Bring us back, Reed.
So yeah, I mean, let's talk back to this idea of colonies and communes are really sort of based around this shared idea. And usually the shared idea is the world at large is getting it wrong in some area. We have a deeper understanding of life and how it should be lived, so we're going to separate ourselves out, and we're going to do this other thing. And what's interesting about that is that in theory, I don't necessarily disagree with that ideal. It's appealing to say, hey, we're going to be free from the trappings and the complications of the larger world. That's appealing. But at the same time, you're kind of building a centralized location where you will never grow and change your perspective at all. Your perspective will never be challenged. Like you'll never be incited to be any different. You'll never be able to think about things in an alternative way. You're just surrounding yourself with like-minded people.
But don't you think, or do you think that depends on the starting point, right? I mean, that sort of depends on the launch pad for why the commune or whatever it is exists. And I bring this up to a podcast that I recommended that you listen to, the Shane Claiborne bit.
Oh.
I was just having a conversation with my wife who was listening to some of his stuff, she was reading some of his stuff. She's in grad school, so she was reading some of his material, Shane Claiborne. And if you know anything about Shane Claiborne, he did make a very intentional sort of withdraw from kind of not modern culture. Like I think he's into it and aware of it and all that sort of stuff. He's not Amish in that way, but has made a very active choice in how he lives his life in terms of money and finances and material goods. And it's interesting. She was telling me about how convicting some of the reading she was doing was of his, because he talks about the church at large. And he was real critical, saying, we talk a big game about the church doing good in the world. And in fact, the phrase he uses is, we're just big distribution centers. It's where everybody, all the middle and upper class white people bring their extra stuff out of their house, and it gets disseminated back into the culture. And then sort of says, like, do you know any poor people? Can you name them?
Wow.
I mean, it was just very anyway, I say that, it makes it sound like I'm being super critical of the church. I know sometimes we can do that. That's not the point I'm trying to make, other than simply to say your, assessment of, I don't think writ large, that withdrawing yourself with a group of people from a specific larger body with intentionality is always and inherently a bad thing, or is indicative of stunted or arrested sort of intellectual or spiritual development. I think it can have very good motive. I'm with you that often it's not.
Right.
More often than not, you hear about David Koresh and crazy people and actual cults. But I do think there's a way that level of intentionality can bear good fruit.
That's a good counterpoint, and I think you've convinced me to sort of dig a little deeper into my assessment of it and explore exactly why I feel the way I do about it. Because I would freely admit that I think Shane Claiborne, while he's living, another person that I think of is like Rich Mullins. Somebody who and I think I'm not opposed to the idea of just like living apart from the world. Certainly not opposed to that idea, because I think you would certainly say this about Claiborne, and I would certainly say it about Mullins, that they're engaged with the world beyond them.
Right.
They just don't call it necessarily home. They just have a different sort of idea or sensibility of home. But the reason I bring that up specifically related to this colony is sort of bleeding back to the idea that they want to be werewolves. That's what the film opens with Dr. Wagner, who we later find out kind of built this colony and populated it with a bunch of werewolves. He is talking about the problem of repression. He's talking about the evils of repression and repressing your desires and saying, like, no, when you inhibit what you want and when you inhibit what you desire, then that leads to all of these external problems and conflicts, and so that's what the film opens with. That's what the film is about. Right. It's one of the reasons why, even though, like we've talked at length about, hey, there's certain moments and certain scenes in particular films that we don't necessarily defend, but one of the reasons I kind of understand, or at least I think I do, why this film's opening sequence leads to a sort of a smut shop, a porn shop, is again talking about this idea of the repression of desires and the things that people would be hiding away and sneaking away and being very secretive to engage with. And Dr. Wagner in the opening sequence of the film is talking about how that's a bad thing. But then the film takes you to a place to where all of the people who are giving themselves over to these very animalistic desires, they're literal monsters. They are
Right.
They are the creatures, the villains of this particular story. And I think that I definitely don't think, if the film were taking a particular posture, I definitely don't think the film is saying that repressing your desires is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's taking a posture of like, hey, maybe sometimes we need to rein in our instincts. Maybe we need to rein in our desires. Maybe we need to rein in what you talked about last week about taking thoughts captive. Like maybe we do need some measure of boundary to where those things are going. I think the film, at least what I glean from it, is that it's saying that sometimes those boundaries are for our good, and that they are, like, I think about her, this will be my last statement before I bounce it back to you, that like when she, in the end, before she transforms into Hello Kitty,
Sanrio, surprise!
that when she's talking, she's giving a speech and she's talking about how it's kind of the right of man to have that struggle, that we struggle with our more animalistic nature, and we struggle with the things that we would really wish would be gone. Like I want to read a couple of quotes. I just pulled this up, and then I'll welcome some thoughts from you. So this is Dr. Wagner's speech. He says, "Repression is the father of neurosis, of self-hatred. Stress results when we fight against our impulses. We've all heard people talk about animal magnetism, the natural man, the noble savage, as if we'd lost something valuable in our long evolution into civilized human beings." So I find that interesting. He's talking about like the fact of like the civilization of ourselves is a bad thing. And I know I keep saying I'm going to bounce it back to you, but then I just get these flurry of thoughts.
And yet I'm just standing here with thoughts that I'm ready, but then they're moot and irrelevant by the time I get.
Okay, so I'm actually going to take a pause because what I'm about to say might lead us in another direction. So I'm actually going to bounce it to you. Do you have any responses to the things I've been saying?
Well, I'm about to blow your mind. So this is happening in real time. So it may be invalid, but I think it's got some merit to it. So you're trying to make the case of, the movie is saying, hey, look at this cultish colony and this is where inhibitions go to die, basically, become very uninhibited. But I feel like you walked right past what could be a valuable theme, or at least a possible theme. And that's, think about, gosh, what is her character's name?
The main girl?
E.T.'s mom.
Oh.
I mean, not E.T.'s mom, Elliot's
mom.
Right.
E.T.'s mom.
That's a totally different movie.
She is Karen.
Okay. So the movie's main action happens at Camp Werewolf, Camp Lupine. and culminates in this sort of, what you're saying, this sort of like, there's no repression, everything is animal and everything is, on fire, like this is where you go to fully express those savage tendencies. It's removed, it's secluded, it's out in the woods, it's isolated. But Karen is walking through, albeit 1981 New York City, and what is everywhere?
Yep.
Peep show. You talk about her ending at the smut shop. I'm saying every step she's taking, there is that stuff in front of her.
Right.
And so it's almost like the movie is trying to say, hey, don't be fooled. This stuff may be happening out in the woods, but it's very much present all around you. Like just because you're not an actual hairy beast doesn't, I don't know. I can't finish that sentence. Right. Yeah. But you see what I'm saying? Like, it's propping up this very isolated scenario of animalistic urge, and expression, while also trying to remind you, don't forget, this is where these characters live. This is where you live.
Yes.
Like this is, Anyway, I don't know. I thought maybe that's kind of an interesting dichotomy.
Oh, it really is. And I don't know how deep I want to go down this path, or how far I want to go down this path, but I've had this thought a lot where I have this reaction when somebody says, a certain archaic idea of morality or right and wrong, like, oh, well, that's just not natural. That's just not natural. Like when people say, oh, that's not natural, and they sort of begin to prop up nature as this thing which kind of needs to be abided by. Like, oh, well, you have the impulses, so why deny yourself? And I'm not making this big blanket statement that we should deny all of our impulses. Try to hear that I'm sort of exploring this subject, that I think we would all agree that some impulses need to be controlled, that some impulses need to be restrained, and that you cannot make a blanket statement like saying like, oh, well, this impulse is perfectly natural, so why should I deny it? You cannot simply make that blanket of a statement without really considering like, well, should you? Like, is there something in you? Right. I get the impulse to walk through a gas station and, hey, I don't have any change on me. Why don't I just take a candy bar? That's a silly, smaller little thing than some of what I'm, some of the echoes of what I might be scratching at. But I've got to resist that impulse. Like I've got, it would be really easy to say like, hey, I don't have any means to pay for this thing and I have the ability to obtain it. Why don't I just take it? And it bleeds into this sort of what it can do. I'll say this. It is very easy for impulses unrestrained to become entitlements. It's very easy for you to say like, hey, because I desire this thing, I am therefore entitled to this thing. And I think that's a very tricky conclusion to land on, to say that because you desire this thing, you are therefore entitled to it. I think that would be tremendously problematic if viewed beyond the realm of your own experience, applied to everybody. I think that would be intensely problematic to simply say like, hey, no, you desire this thing, so you should have it. That's a problem.
That is a problem. That's a very big problem. Well, it's funny, your use of the word impulse. This is a very sad story, but it has some merit here. I remember, this is about, 8 years ago now, learning of it was actually a teacher, in my hometown that I had really looked up to, who a number of years after I got out, after college, we got out of college, but this is high school level, had relations with a student, if not more, than one student. And I remember I was so torn between being like devastated and just not knowing what to feel. But I remember this, like your word, impulse. I just remember thinking about that a lot during that season. Like, we are all, I don't want to prop up, I'm going to set up a construct, a sort of philosophical construct here, but not commit to it. And what I mean by that is, at that season of time, I kept thinking like, man, are we all just one barriered impulse away from just screwing it all up? You know what I mean? Like, are we just victim of our impulses? Right.
Right.
And it's only, the naive of us who make it to the finish line having resisted those impulses. Now that was those thoughts of 10 years ago. I don't ascribe to the notion we are just a bundle of resisted impulses.
Right.
I mean, I think there's a lot more at play and at work in our decision making, but I do think there is a way in which you just have vices, or rather you have behaviors that can become vices.
Yes.
Or behaviors that can become habits that can become vices that lead to impulse.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I told my wife the other day, I'm like, why am I eating this, whatever it was a snack or something. Like, you'd see me, I'm not like a giant person or anything, or overly obese or anything like that, but there are moments where I'm like, why am I eating this?
Right.
And I have those moments, like, this was an impulse. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not hungry.
Right.
It's just, like to how real world is it that you might steal something or someone might steal something? No, I'm making this real. It was like, I just went and ate a bowl of cereal at 10 o'clock. Why did I do that? Like,
right.
You feel stupid after the fact. Like it's pure, you're not even operating out of self, right? It's just pure, like, this is impulse.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this movie is trying to say is like, what happens when there is no barrier between impulse and action. And I think that's a very scary place.
Yeah. It really is. It's probably a good opportunity to bring in the scripture that I was thinking about. But I did want to have one quote that character played by John Carradine, his name's Earl, but he says at one point to Dr. Wagner, he says, "You can't tame what's meant to be wild, Doc." And he even uses the words, he says, "It ain't natural." And one of the things that I think we have said on this show, and I think this frequently, that it can be an illusion to feel like, oh, well, if I just act out of my own impulses and my own desires, that if I just act out of that, then that's real freedom. And then that's really,
right.
that's the best possible place that I could be, the best possible station I could be in. But in fact, and I'm almost positive we've said this on the show before, that what you then become is a slave to your own desires. You then become a slave to something else. And I thought about in relation to that, Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 through 16 for this film. It says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command, love your neighbor as yourself." And then how appropriate is this for the Howling? Verse 15, "If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other." Verse 16, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." And it's interesting to me that it uses that language, that Galatians uses that language of devouring each other in relation to, thinking about this film.
Maybe there was a werewolf in the Church of Galatia.
Good Lord, that's Paul's really got his eye on this one guy that he's like,
he's on the nose.
This guy's trouble. But like, sincerely, the idea that, like, I think that happens when we just allow our desires and our impulses to dictate and determine how we walk through the world and how we engage with other people. Like, if we let that be the determining factor for what we're going to do, then it becomes very consumptive very quickly. Like, then yes, you will just, the language is a little harsh there and a bit extreme of a turn, but if you bite and devour each other, watch out, you'll be destroyed by each other. Like, that's what will eventually happen in this particular colony. I mean, they have to consume at some point. They desire to consume. And that's where you get these poor victims who come in and
thinking they're just at camp.
Thinking like, oh, this will be a lovely retreat. But, but, I do think there is, I guess this is the sum of what I want to say about it, is that if you do not position yourself in a place where your desires can be checked, where they can be challenged, if you do not position yourself in a place where even though you are free, I mean, the scriptures also says you were called to be free, but if you don't position yourself in a place where that freedom can have some accountability, then you will begin to use your freedom to indulge your own flesh. And when that happens, it's going to become consumptive. It's going to become bigger and broader than you. And pretty soon you are just going to be nothing but appetite. There's all this talk, we've mentioned how the porn industry is called out to in the early stages of the film. Some of the science, I'm not even talking about the religious implications. Some of the science behind what has happened to people who are addicted to pornography is terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying about how they see the world, about how they see human beings, about the pathways, the neural pathways that just erode to where there is almost no resistance whatsoever to engaging in behavior that then results in a kind of a self-shaming. And again, I hope listeners who may be struggling with something like that don't hear any shaming on my part. There's none here. I feel the same way I do about any, as we've said last week, as we say to you are more than the worst thing that you've done. Like that's how I view people. That's how I view the world. But attacking the stigma itself and attacking the industry itself, it is pure appetite. And when left to just grow and become more and more satiated, it will never be satisfied. It's a black hole of never reaching a place where it's going to be enough. Nothing will ever be enough. And I think that's the real horror of giving ourselves over to what we would consider and just becoming and advocating that our desires are the God we serve, that our desires are what we bow down to and what we listen to, in terms of how to navigate through our world. So yeah, that's not heavy at all.
On that note, let's talk about some silly guy in a pumpkin costume.
So, you want to? I've led the charge explaining this to our listeners the last couple of times. You want to tell them what we do at this part of our show every week?
Sure. I mean, if you're new to the Fear of God bandwagon, one, welcome. We're glad to have you. Sign your name in the book at the end of the pew. Be sure to give when the plate gets passed around.
Hope you enjoyed this conversation.
Yes. We hope you come back. But no, we rank every movie that we talk about, or every generally piece of content we talk about, on a very specific metric, finding both beauty and horror and humor in the Tom Hanks creation David S. Pumpkins, as featured on last fall's SNL Halloween episode. We rank the movies by 3 specific categories. That is style, scares, and substance, by numbers of David S. Pumpkins 1 through 5, or 0 through 5, as you helped educate me on last week.
Gave you the freedom.
I don't think I'm good. Right. I may not, but freedom, it may lead to indulgence and impulse.
It's true.
Problems. But it's interesting. I'm gonna backpedal just a hair here. The idea of service and you'll love this. The Bob Dylan, you got to serve somebody.
That's right.
But, you cannot serve God and man. Like, there's this way in which I feel like objectors to Christianity or objectors to faith view it as, sort of weak or naive or something like that. Whereas I think the reverse is true, that you are going to become enslaved to something.
Yes, you will.
Like, it may be something super self-destructive, like pornography or drugs or, sexual addiction. These things that have very real, visible, destructive problems to your life. Or it may be things like your own intellect or your own pursuits.
Right.
Like, you are going to serve something. You're going to become, a slave sounds like a strong word, but there's a way in which that's going to be the case. And so it's almost like the language of serving God in Scripture is almost simply to save us. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a, you're so terrible, you better come to me, as opposed to, it's simply like, based on how we are wired, we're going to end up casting our lot in a certain direction,
right? Whether
we want to or not. And hey, here is where, the living water flows. Here is where, the bread will multiply. Like, you will never go hungry again. Like, this is where you can cast your lot. Anyway, I know that's a random aside, but I just kept thinking about that with, this conversation of indulgence and impulse. So yes, David S. Pumpkins. So with Joe Dante's The Howling, on the David S. Pumpkins scale, Reed, what do you give style? That's what I'm looking for. See, there are all these stupid S words. I'm just kidding.
So,
I love S words.
I would give it, for style, I think I'm going to give it a 4 for style, because I think it's really solid. There's a couple of things, even though I didn't really cite anything in dislikes, there's a couple of moments that I'm just kind of like, really? So.
But see, you make it sound like a 4 is a tempered like.
Oh, that's funny.
To me,
4 is pretty.
4 is like
pretty high.
That's strong.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Considering we do halvesies.
Yeah, that's true.
You're at like a 9. You're at a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. No, yeah, all right. Well, then no apologies. Right. I give it a 4.
Yeah, you give it a 4. I think having no idea what to expect, not having watched this, licentious lycanthropy at 9 years old like you did. I will give, I think I'd give it a 3.5.
All right.
On The Howling.
That's all right. All right. What would you give it for scares?
I think probably 3.5.
3.5?
I think the visual effects and the makeup effects are impressive.
Yeah, right.
And I think they are creepy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it's like, I didn't go to bed worried about nightmares. So,
true.
I'm going to stick in the kind of like 3.5, but I'll go with 3.5.
For kind of the same reasons, but leaning a little higher, I think I'm going to give it a 4 as well with making almost the exact same statements where I'm just like, I didn't go to bed having nightmares, but I think everything that they do for scares is really effective. Although like I said, the barn and the scene in the doctor's office just creeped the crap out of me. Always do. Yeah, they're really scary there.
Yeah, I think there'd be some openness to bumping that by a half point just because of Eddie's transformation, but I'm going to keep it at a 3.5.
At 3.5. And then so substance. What would you rank The Howling for substance?
I'm going to go, I honestly struggled. Our conversation yielded more than I would have thought based on my viewing of the movie. Not that I thought it was vapid, but I'm going to go 3.
All right.
On substance.
I'm going to go 3. And I think I'm just going to go 4 across the board. I think this is one of those, solid sort of 4-level films in my estimation of it, where it's like, yeah, does it hit the upper heights of the kind of things that I get super excited about? Not quite, but I think it's really good. It's really solid, and I really enjoy revisiting every time I get the chance to. So that having been said, we officially here at The Fear of God give The Howling probably our favorite rating that we give anything, and that is 7 out of 10 David S. Pumpkins. Any questions?
We got to tweet to Tom Hanks and just let him know we're talking about him every week. And hopefully he'll invite us on SNL next year.
Right, yeah,
this year.
Exactly. We
can be his little dancers. We'll be his dancers in the sketch.
Oh my gosh. You just want Tom Hanks to
smack my bottom.
Yeah, smack you on the bottom.
Sure. Why not?
But yeah, so we give it 7 out of 10 David S. Pumpkins. And I think The Howling every bit deserves that easily. I think if you've never seen it, and you listen to this to decide if you should, as we've alluded to, there's some adult content, particularly in the beginning and a couple of points in the middle, but it's a really strong film. And I think that it is definitely worth your time, and it's definitely worth a revisiting. As we say on every episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it is not the end of the conversation. And we would love to hear you continue the conversation with us. You can do so in a variety of ways. You can reach out to us on Twitter. Nathan, what is our Twitter handle?
At The Fear of God.
You can also like us on Facebook. You can post to us there or comment on one of our posts. You can also follow me on Twitter at Reed Lackey. And Nathan, where can they find you on Twitter besides The Fear of God?
At The Nathan Ralph.
You can also go to morethanonelesson.com, leave a comment on one of the official posts there. Or you can email us, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And we would love for you to pop over to iTunes if you listen to us that way and leave us a review there. We would greatly appreciate that. And otherwise, we would just love to hear from you. I know that the werewolf subject in general is a very broad, big subject. I'm positive that it's going to be one that we're going to revisit again in the near future. But yeah, I mean, just as a sort of a starting point or a primer, The Wolfman from 41 and The Howling from 81 really are, I think, as we've illustrated, provide some good food for conversation and some good food for thought. So Nathan, thank you so much as always for indulging my impulses and watching these movies with me and having this conversation with me.
Yes, I am happy to indulge.
So,
all right.
Check out social media to see what we're going to be talking about next. We have, if things go according to plan, a couple of very big icons that we're covering in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned to social media to find out what those are going to be. And as always, we'll catch you next week.
See you next time, guys. Thanks for listening.
Hi,